All right, I believe we are up and running on YouTube. So David, you can go ahead with the opening.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hereby call to order the City of Ithaca Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for April 12th, 2022. The board operates under the provisions of the Ithaca City Charter, Ithaca Zoning Ordinance, Ithaca Sign Ordinance, and the board's own rules of procedure. The board comprises 5 members nominated by the mayor and approved by Common Council. Board members present tonight are Michael Cannon, Andre Gardenier, Stephen Henderson, Joseph Kirby, as well as Assistant City Attorney Victor Kessler, Planning Staff Anya Harris, and Zoning Administrator Megan Wilson, staff to the board. I'm David Barkin, chairperson of the board. The secretary to the board, Megan Wilson, will call each case in the order listed on the agenda. Appellants will then have a maximum of 5 minutes to present new material or highlight aspects of their appeal. Board members may question appellants on any areas requiring clarification. Full consideration of appeals requires a public hearing, deliberation, and then voting by the board. These actions occur only after the appellant has filed appropriate documents with the zoning division and planning and development board. Public hearings include testimony from, quote, interested parties. The board considers interested parties persons who live, work, or own property within 750 feet of the property, who are authorized representative of recognized adjacent neighborhood civic groups, or who are elected city officials. Board members may question testifying interested parties on any areas requiring clarification. Persons who do not meet the board's interested party definition will not be heard. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Appellants will then be allowed to rebut opposing testimony, but appellants' comments must be limited to strict rebuttal of the issues raised by those opposed and will be limited to 5 minutes. A timer will sound at the end of each speaker's allotted time. While we do not adhere to strict rules of evidence, we do consider this a quasi-judicial proceeding, and we base our decisions on the official record. The official record consists of application materials filed with the zoning division, correspondence relating to cases received by the zoning division, the planning and development board's own findings and recommendations, if any, and the record of tonight's meeting. An audio recording is being made of this meeting. Therefore, it is essential anyone wanting to be heard speaks clearly, so their comments are recorded and heard by everyone. Extraneous comments will neither be recorded nor considered by the board. We ask everyone to limit their comments to the zoning issues of each appeal and not comment on matters beyond the board's jurisdiction. Following the appellant's rebuttal, the appeal hearing will be closed and the board will begin deliberation. The board is required to render a decision within 62 days of the public hearing's closure. Once the hearing is closed, no further testimony will be taken. It takes 3 votes to approve a motion to grant variance or favorable interpretation. In the event of a tie vote, an appeal is denied. Tonight's online meeting format requires us to manage public comment differently, but the board always welcomes input from interested parties. Tonight's appeals are available for public review on the city website, and the meeting is being streamed live online via YouTube. Interested parties are welcome to address the board as part of this online meeting, or may submit comments to be read into the record during the public hearing. Megan, would you kindly call our first case? I apologize, well, I'm sorry. First off, my dog's making some noise here, but we have some agenda review items first before we call our first case. Correct, Megan?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So first, we're going to hopefully add on to our agenda, unless anyone opposes, early feedback from board members on upcoming projects. And then we'll also add an executive session that I can enumerate on later. Is there any opposition to that? Okay. So with that, Megan, are we ready for our first appeal, number 3214?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Appeal number 3214 for 209 East J Street. Appeal of property owners Ann Ward and Michael Pastor for an area variance from section 325.8, column 4, off-street parking, column 6, lot area, column 10, lot coverage by buildings, column 11, front yard, column 12, side yard, column 13, other side yard, and column 14, 15, rear yard requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant proposes to construct a new enclosed porch that will wrap around the southeast corner of the house at 209 East J Street. The new porch will replace an existing porch and steps that lead to the side yard. The new porch will have a door and steps that face East J Street and an additional steps that lead to the rear yard. The proposed porch will be 42 square feet or approximately double the existing 20 square foot porch. This additional space will increase the property's lot coverage by buildings to 61% of the 35% allowed in the R2B zone. In addition, the new porch will extend to the rear property line and will further reduce the existing rear yard from 5.6 feet to 2.1 feet of the 20 feet required. On the east side of the house, the new porch will reduce the side yard to 3 feet of the required 5 feet. The side yard is already deficient at 3.7 feet, and the proposed construction will result in an exacerbation of this deficiency. The property has existing deficiencies in off-street parking, lot area, front yard, and others in side yard that will not be exacerbated by the proposal. The property is located in an R2B residential use district in which the proposed use is permitted. However, section 32538 requires that an area variance be granted before a building permit is issued. And I believe the applicants are here. Hi, Ann.
Hello.
Okay. Ann, I think you might be muted.
Hi.
Hello. So it's usually a 5-minute presentation. If you could please make your case to the board and explain to us your project.
Well, I think that Megan described it pretty well. We have at present just the most basic platform back porch, which is pretty much needs to be replaced. So that's the motivation for the project. And given the way our house is built, it is kind of inconvenient to particularly come into the front door of the house during the winter because the stairs go down to the front door and that's where the bedroom is and so on. And the bathroom is on the first floor. It's kind of, so it just would be a lot more convenient for us to be able to have some kind of larger porch in the back, maybe to keep our bicycles as well, which we don't have room to do otherwise, at least not in a safe way. So those are some of the motivations for building the porch.
Okay. And you had submitted drawings alongside this to sort of bring us up to speed. Are there questions from board members right off the top?
No.
Okay. I think if that's the case, then we could open public hearing. Megan?
So we have not received any written comments in either support or opposition of this appeal, and we also do not have anyone signed up to speak this evening. I do have the recommendation from the Planning and Development Board, which I can read. The Planning Board supports home improvement and ownership investments in older homes and neighborhoods. They find the existing and proposed variances to be minor deficiencies, and the addition of the enclosed porch to be an improvement to the property's appearance and aligned with neighborhood character. The board finds no long-term impacts to planning.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll go to discussion and deliberation. Anyone off the top of their head have thoughts? Steve?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say that the request seems pretty minor in terms of size of variance and both numerically and physically. So
Okay, I'll just keep going around. I'll go to Mike, then Joe, then Andre.
I agree with that. I don't have any problems. Very small request. Not a big impact on the neighborhood. Looks fine.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, about the same, just putting a cover on what's there and extending it to the backyard where it doesn't affect anybody, so I don't really have a problem with it.
Okay, and Andre, you're,
Yep, same as everyone else. It seems like a good, solution to their problem.
is there anybody that would like to make a motion? Either in favor or against?
I'll motion it.
move-
Okay. So, let's see. All right, so is there a motion to grant this variance? And then if so, I mean, does somebody want to read it out? There's,
Oh, I don't want to
Joe?
read it out of my first meeting.
okay, I was gonna
I'll
try
do
to
it.
figure it out.
We'll give you a pass, Andre.
I'll take this one.
All right. So yeah, so Joe will read it out and then if there's a second to the motion, Andre, and then Megan will pull the board members.
So I will move to grant the variance for appeal 3214. Running down the factors considered, first, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. They're trying to add an enclosed porch. The new enclosed porch will be larger than the existing porch and will exacerbate existing deficiencies in. Give me a sec. Oh, the exacerbations are relatively minor and there's no evidence that they will produce undesirable change on the character of the neighborhood or surrounding properties. The other deficiencies are existing and won't be exacerbated. The board has not received any comments in opposition. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance, no. Due to multiple existing area deficiencies, it is not feasible for the applicant to create a larger porch on any portion of the property without exacerbating a deficiency. The applicant could rebuild within the existing porch footprint, but the larger porch better meets the needs of the property owners. Whether the requested variance is substantial, no. While some of the area deficiencies of the property are substantial, they are existing deficiencies that predate the zoning ordinance. The exacerbation of the deficiencies are minor. Again, the other deficiencies won't be exacerbated. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood? No. Based on submitted materials and testimony of the applicant, there is no evidence of adverse physical or environmental impacts resulting from either the existing or exacerbated area deficiencies. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, yes, this one's always kind of self-created. However, the larger enclosed porch better meets the needs of the property owners without creating any identified adverse impacts on the neighborhood or surrounding properties.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Megan, could you please poll board members?
Cannon,
Sorry, what was that?
Mr. Cannon? is
Oh,
our first
yes,
up.
I'm fine.
Mr. Gardner,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yep.
and Mr. Larkin.
Yes.
So, and that motion carries unanimously and your variance has been approved. I will be sending a copy of this to the code inspector assigned to your project, and I will also get you a copy within the next couple of days as well. So you should be all set on this end and can move on towards the building permit process.
Great, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So just moving right along, our next appeal will be 3201, which is 430 North Cayuga Street, which we saw previously. So just to start, Megan, is there an update that we can get on where things stand?
Yes, okay, so if for all of you who remember, this is the property located at 430 North Cayuga at the corner with Cascadilla. They were originally seeking a parking variance for 6 spaces, 5 for the residential use and 1 for the ground floor neighborhood commercial use, which is the Gimme Coffee. At the last meeting, the board, while supportive of the fact that Gimme Coffee has not really needed those spaces, there was a concern by granting the variance in perpetuity that the board, that a future neighborhood commercial use might need off-street parking that wouldn't be required. So in going back and reviewing and discussing with the city attorney's office, the applicant would now like to propose that they maintain a space for the neighborhood commercial on site behind, that not necessarily required to use it, but they will maintain it to meet the minimum requirements of the parking by the zoning ordinance, and then seek a variance for the 5 required residential parking spaces. So the variance has been reduced to be the residential parking requirement only.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here, and is there anything for them to add or that they wish to chime in on?
Yeah, there's 2 of us here, and I don't think we have anything to add. I think most of the work has been done behind the scenes with Megan to figure out the right variant to apply for.
Okay, thank you.
But we're here to answer questions if you have any.
Okay, well, so then next, from board members, questions for the appellant or for Megan?
So does this will permanently waive the parking requirement for the residential property? Is that correct?
That's correct.
How many units are in the building and how many spots are required?
There are 5 units on the upper stories according to our files, and they require each 1 spot each, so 5 residential, and then the 6th spot that's required is for the neighborhood commercial use.
I was not at the February meeting, but I watched the video of it. It's been acting as sort of an outdoor meeting area for the last 2 years. How has it been acting in that way in terms of, what kind of city approvals, and is there any reason why we can't just do that over a longer term basis?
So this was the outdoor seating area was approved kind of right as COVID was kicking off. It was a temporary approval that we provided to a few similar type commercial restaurant cafe establishments to help through the height of the pandemic. We haven't gotten very many complaints about it, so and I think it's worked out well for the applicants. They can add to that, but to kind of take the parking for the residential units in particular offline any longer, we do need to do something more formal to approve that and of not providing the parking.
If we were to grant the variance in this manner, it'd be the same as us granting any other parking spot variance.
So yes, I would say for the most part, you're removing the requirement that they provide the parking for the 5 residential spaces. I would say the difference then from what we see in some other off-street parking variances is that, technically, if the outdoor seating area was removed, it would, the parking area is still beneath it. It's not building a building in place of it. It's not at this point, but they wouldn't be required to provide those spaces even if they did take up the outdoor area. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that mean a parking variance for that area could be contingent on its existing use being maintained? So the second a commercial outfit removed those tables and chairs, it would, they would lose the right to that parking variance?
Typically, and I'll let Victor chime in as well, but typically if the variance is granted, it's granted in perpetuity. A condition like that, we looked into that, but it's not as it's clear to do either one or the other. And I mean, if the board isn't comfortable with the residential spaces as well, that's certainly something you have the right to consider and say yes or no to. But applying the condition for just this particular use, it doesn't fall in line with how a variance typically runs.
Thank you. And then there was also talk last time about their special permit. So this doesn't really pertain to that, correct? I mean, you can't tie this to a special, because it's really not, it's sort of removing the commercial, it's removing the commercial outfit from the variance request. It's really just now a parking variance tied to the building. Is that
So it's
correct?
tied to the property, which you're right, does have the residential uses. In terms of requiring that that the special permit be renewed every 5 years as laid out in the ordinance, I suppose that could still be a condition unless Victor disagrees, which I would defer to.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, and I think the thing to consider is that the variance does run with the property, not necessarily with the business. I think so that's helpful to think about as you're considering.
Okay, so the special permit really isn't at play here. This is just this is 5 spots for 5 residentials.
Correct.
Did they need permission from the city in 2020 to do this in the first place? Like on some level, we don't really, sit there and judge what people do with their driveways. Like my next door neighbor uses it to store firewood. Like, do they by right have the, they're the tenants, they're renting parking spaces from the landlord. So the landlord is making the parking spaces available. And then the tenant is just choosing to park lawn furniture and people there. Like if I decided to put a sunbathing pool in my driveway, do I have the same right?
So technically, without a variance, you're right, like to the point that the space that's like, for example, the space that's going to be maintained for Gimme Coffee, they don't have to use. They could put a planter there. But they have to have that space. Similarly, the upper floor parking spaces are dedicated to the residential use. So with the ground floor commercial tenant occupying the residential parking spaces, it doesn't leave those for the residents to use. And without, there's no physical access to those spaces right now because of the structure that's on this site. So they're seeking the variance for those residential spaces that are there.
So I thought it was just you have to make parking spaces available to your tenants, not have to make a space available to each one. So I thought that was.
It's a good question. It's a good question. So you have to have a certain number of spaces per unit based on the number of bedrooms. So for this particular configuration, it's 5. The property owner certainly could say, well, we're going to use these spaces to allow the outdoor seating area, but we're going to lease 5 spaces off site to meet that. They could also do it that way, but they've chosen to seek the variance for the spaces.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if they can do this by right, and if in the future they want to turn it back into parking, they have the flexibility to do with whatever. It just like it seems like they would have this right inherently. Like the landlord is still providing parking spaces to the building, just one tenant is renting all of them, and they're choosing to use that parking in a manner that's not parking cars. Like if they parked boats there, like it just seems like they have an inherent right to do this.
I don't think so. I think they need to make spaces available to their residential tenants. They're asking not to have spaces available for their residential tenants. That's what this request
is. The coffee shop is leasing them. They're not available, to Mike's point, for the residences. Sorry, I see
the most comfortable thing here would be if we could have this run with the permit to operate the restaurant. We can't do that, huh? We can't say, okay, we're permitting this use with the existing commercial tenant.
And that's right, because it's because the variance runs with the property, not necessarily with the occupants of the property.
But Gimme has a right to operate as a coffee shop due to a variance or due to a license?
A special permit.
So-
So it's not a variance. So if they should leave, someone else would have to apply again for a
So we
new.
can't give them a special permit for the waiver of the residential parking spaces? We can't tie these two together?
No, not for the residential, at least,
Okay.
especially. I mean, I think originally when the BZA last looked at the special permit, they attempted to do that with the commercial space. But in terms of taking all of them offline, but Anne, I keep seeing you raise your hand. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was helpful or not to, I have like a short history of the parking lot from the building owners, if that would be helpful to share or not.
Sure. Yeah, just to loop you back in, right? So the public hearing was held on February 8th. And then there was one written comment of support. I believe that we also received a letter from the building owners. So yeah, please, if you have other information or want to sort of.
Okay, yeah, this is from the building owners. Yeah, so they just told me the history of the parking lot. So they have owned the building for about 10 years. And upon taking ownership, the lot was filled with debris. So old couches, former tenant furnishings, a shed, a garage that was also filled with stuff like unusable. There was like plants and trees. It was sort of overgrown, and everything was removed from the area. So the fence was removed, the sheds were removed, and the cars that were able to park in the lot, like they with the way that you pull in the driveway, there was only ever 3 cars that were able to be like in that lot to begin with. And I think they tried to get 4 in, but cars were being dented when they were pulling in and out because they were getting around other cars. And so they had 3 paying parking tenants, and only one of those tenants was a daily driver. The other tenants just used their car, like their car just sat there. It was sort of used as a storage for those 2 vehicles. And when the building owners removed parking from their leases, the tenants found spots to park nearby permanently. The ones that were storing their cars then found other spots. And the commercial tenant had never had access to parking there. So Gimme Coffee never had a parking spot there. And they're trying to, like, this whole idea of having the spot be a spot for the tenant could go with the space, so there would always be a spot there, included with the seating area that's there now. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I just wanted to share that with you all.
So I guess is the argument in that part kind of 2-pronged. First, that the previous owners were in violation of providing the spaces because of disrepair. And so they want to use that to their benefit, but then also that realistically for like 2 or 3 of the spots, however you want to count it, would almost be like, when we look at whether the alleged difficulty was self-created as that prong of it, 3 of the spots, 2 of the spots, if 4 can fit, but it's sketchy, are just unusable. And so it's not actually self-created. So for those 2 spots, and then now we're looking at only needing a difference of 3 spots. My math's all over the place, but I think the point stands that it wasn't feasible to fit those in there. It's not as bad. Is that how I'm supposed to read that?
Well, I would say that the requirement is still the same, and they need to seek a variance for the same number of spaces. That doesn't necessarily mean, I would say that doesn't necessarily to your point, it might not be as big of a change from existing conditions in terms of looking at impacts of the requested variance. So the request is the same, but you're right. You could look at it that way to, in terms of addressing impacts on the neighborhood. You're not losing 4 spots, you're losing 3 is what you're saying. So you're basically could potentially be putting 3 cars out onto the street, whereas as opposed to 4 or that kind of thing. But in terms of the request, would be the same, even if it was an existing deficiency.
Okay.
So this building already had an existing deficiency in parking that's on the books, correct?
That's correct.
And what's that deficiency? That's the 1 spot? Or
So, again, by measurements that we had in our files, there was 4 spaces. I can completely understand. I'm not saying that's just what the record was. And they're required to have 6. So there's a deficiency of 2.
So
and
they're,
then, yeah,
I'm sorry. So they're gonna, if this were to pass, board members are voting to exacerbate a 2-spot deficiency to 6, or to, they're exacerbating it by 4.
providing 1 on site. So basically they're seeking a variance for 5 spaces. So they're removing 3 essentially per
Okay.
official record.
Does that make sense to board members? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I will note it is unusual. I mean, typically when we think of a parking variance, it's not this type of situation where theoretically in the future, the parking is still there. We typically see it when it's just not going to be constructed at all, or you're taking out a parking spot. So this is a little different. So I do understand it is tricky. It's an unusual situation. So.
Okay. And this is R2B zoning. So it's a non-conforming building, non-conforming use. Okay. Is there
Yeah,
anything
so-
else you can just sort of remind board members of? Like,
Right,
it's
so-
such a unique building, so.
I mean, you'll think too, when you think of the non-conforming use, you're probably thinking of Give Me Coffee on the ground floor. That actually is not non-conforming, which is why this isn't necessarily use variance. It's the upper floors have established rights to multiple dwellings, whereas typically multiple dwellings aren't allowed in an R2. They're not, so if they wanted to increase the number of bedrooms with the number of occupants, that would be a different type of issue. So yes, the upper floors are non-conforming use. The ground floor is a conforming use by special permit. So this is a very interesting building, and it hits a lot of different things that this board looks at. So
Thank you. I think I'll just go around. I'll start with Mike, then Joe. Same thing. Let's just see where people's heads are at on it. And,
I'm fine with this.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good for the neighborhood. I think it's good for the area. I think a lot of people have liked it. I don't have a problem with it. We're not talking about a lot of spots. There hasn't been complaints about people not being able to park. Yeah, I'm gonna be okay with it.
Andre?
Yeah, similar. I don't have any. I can't think of any drawbacks to it. I think it's positive for the neighborhood. It's good for the business. It makes sense. I'm still confused on the code of why they have to do this, but this is what it takes. It seems to hamstring them down the road, but so be it.
Okay. Missy, and then Steven.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay. I am as well. I think if you look at it in terms of the criteria, I don't think you'd be able to replicate this type of ask elsewhere, right? It's such a unique building, in my opinion, right? And it's such a urban centric building. So you're essentially saying, well, in this particular case, the parking isn't required, and it's more an accident of history in a sense that it's zoned the way it is, and that we're up against some of the challenges that we're trying to work through. Am I onto something there? I don't know.
Yeah, I still think it'd be easier if we could just tie the two together, that if the tenancy left, the residential parking would be restored.
Okay.
That's how I wish we could do this. But I'll make a motion if people are ready for a motion.
Or board members? I think so, Mike.
Okay, a motion to grant the variance number 3201 for 430 North Cuga Street was made by Michael Cannon. Deliberations and findings, Gimmy's a good neighbor, fits well within the neighborhood, could revert back to a parking area if the tenancy changes. Seems to provide plenty of on-street parking nearby, lots of walking customers, nice neighborhood. The factors we considered were whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. I say no, the property is required to provide 6 spaces. They have previously provided 4. The spaces are not being physically removed from the site, but are occupied by the outdoor dining area. The outdoor dining area is the result of the COVID situation, and 1 space will be dedicated to neighborhood commercial use. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. No, due to the size of this seating area, it's not feasible to provide the parking and the seating area. The applicants could remove the temporarily authorized seating area and provide 4 of the 6 required off-street parking spaces. However, the removal of these parking spaces has not negatively impacted nearby properties, but has brought significant benefit to the ground floor commercial tenant. The deficiencies in the lot area, lot width, lot coverage are existing deficiencies that predate the establishment of the city's zoning ordinance. Whether the variance is substantial, I'm going to say no. The applicants are seeking a variance for 6 off-street parking spaces or 100% of the required parking. It is a substantial percentage, but it's not a substantial number of spaces. The existing lot area, lot width, lot coverage, and other side yard deficiencies will not be exacerbated by this proposal. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood? I would say no. The BZA, acting as lead agency, has conducted appropriate environmental review to determine that the granting of the requested variances will not have an adverse effect on the environment. The granting of the requested variances will not result in additional physical changes to the property, as the outdoor seating area has existed under a temporary approval since 2020. The existing lot area, lot width, front yard, second front yard, and other side yard deficiencies will not be exacerbated by this proposal. Was the difficulty self-created? I would have to say yes. The property has established rights to existing use and configuration, but this is removing the residential parking requirement. So I would say this was self-created.
Thank you.
Can I offer a friendly correction that I had missed and change a number 3, to 5 and 80% as opposed to 6 and 100? That was my error when the change in proposal was made. Is that
Okay,
reasonable?
sure. Accepted.
Is there a second to this motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Megan, can you please poll?
Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Gardner,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yep.
and Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
All right, so the variance request is approved. I will send this upstairs. I know there's no physical construction or need for a building permit, but it's a current condition on the certificate of compliance with the building. So I will get that up to the building division to remove that condition so that that's all set for you all. So, all right.
Thank you, and thank you for working with us on this.
All right.
So I think we're moving right along.
Yeah.
Next up is, let's see here, 3198, which is 228 Dryden Road, correct?
That's correct. Bear with me here while I pull this up. Okay. So appeal number 3198 for 228 Dryden Road is an appeal of Holt Architects on behalf of property owner Boris Simkin for an area variance from section 325-45.2F Collegetown Residential 4 or CR4 district standards for lot coverage by buildings, rear yard, and maximum building length. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing structure and construct a new apartment building on the property at 228 Dryden Road. The building will be 4 stories tall with an occupiable basement below grade and will provide 35 residential units. The building was originally designed to meet the row house requirements of the CR4 district, but changes to the project have caused the structure to no longer meet those requirements. This has resulted in a deficiency in maximum building length. The building will be 71 feet 9 inches long. While row houses are permitted to be 100 feet in length, other structures cannot exceed 45 feet in length. The proposed building will also be deficient in the rear yard and maximum lot coverage by building requirements of the zoning ordinance. Due to the steep topography on the site, the building has been located further to the north, resulting in a 10-foot rear yard deficiency, a 10-foot rear yard and a deficiency of 10 feet. The property is permitted 50% lot coverage by buildings, and the proposed project will cover 57.4% of the lot with buildings and but will exceed the minimum green space requirement. The applicants presented an original proposal for this project at the November 2021 BZA meeting, at which time the project required area variances for lot coverage by buildings, minimum green space, both side yards and the rear yard. BZA members expressed concern about the extent of the requested variances, particularly lot coverage by buildings and minimum green space. Based on the BZA's feedback, the applicant has revised the project to eliminate the side yard and minimum green space variances and reduce the requested variances for lot coverage by buildings, rear yard, and maximum building length. 228 Dryden Road is located in a CR4 district in which the proposed use is permitted. However, section 325-38 requires that an area variance be granted before the building permit is issued.
Thank you. And so we're going to run through this, right? We'll first have another presentation, questions, and then a new public hearing, correct, Megan? Is that okay? And then we're going to hold this public hearing open until May 3rd. Is that so? We're just giving initial feedback, correct? This is not a voting item tonight.
That's correct. This isn't a voting item this evening. The board wanted a chance to hear the presentation and discuss with the applicants, and then we can go from there if there's any changes or if the board will be prepared to vote at May 3rd.
Great, thank you. Is the appellant here?
We are. Hi, David. I'm Steve Hugo with Holt Architects.
Nice to meet you. So yeah, if you have a presentation for us, roughly 5 minutes, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you all for your time tonight. I will maybe recap a little from what happened last meeting. I did want to start off by just reiterating that we are in the CR4 district, and some of the language that you come across in the city code refers to this as a transitional neighborhood, that in between sort of the less dense residential neighborhoods in the MU district, that this is something in between. And there is specific language in there about multifamily dwellings and buildings that are as tall as 4 stories and 45 feet tall. And we are in compliance in that respect. So I just want to point out that, this does seem to be the type of development that the city was looking for in the CR4 district. This site is incredibly challenging in just the shape of it. This trapezoidal shape and the size of the parcel make it difficult to develop, as well as the fact that from sidewalk to the rear of the site, there's a 26-foot grade change, like over 2 stories from down here at the sidewalk to the rear elevation of the site. And the site is also sloping on Dryden Road. There's a 7-foot grade change from one side to the other. So the topography is sort of all over the place, which makes it kind of challenging to develop. And the property line happens on on the other side of this retaining wall. So we immediately have to sort of traverse this site to enter the building. So there's, over a story of grade change to get into the ground level of the building. Along with that, there are hardships to the project. We're paying for lots of deep retaining, shoring and retaining walls to develop on the site. So it is a challenge. I did want to, I know, in your deliberations, you guys are looking at a lot of things, and, in a very basic way, you're looking at the benefit to the developer owner versus, any detriment to the community. And I did want to point out that this site today, if you visit this site, it's a meandering, dilapidated stair that takes you up to the top of this hill, where there is this, more dilapidated building. And I would argue that in this district where we're looking for that kind of multifamily development, we're bringing this building down to the street. It's very street friendly. If we did smaller development, we'd actually be allowed to put a building on the hill that's not accessible. But in the end, because we're doing this larger development, this building has ramps that go up to the entrance. It's an elevator building. All the units are going to be type B units, which is a level of accessibility, essentially like a convertible accessible unit. So I think there is a tremendous benefit to the community in terms of filling that need. Going back to our meeting that we had with you a few months ago, we presented our project to you, and in your packet, I believe it's the last page, I might just want to point you to, there's a chart here, which is the requirements from the zoning chart, what we previously provided to you in that design, and then the modifications to our design and the result of what we're asking today. So ultimately, what we heard from you last time is we were asking for too much in the form of 5 variance asks from the chart. And I think you guys did hit and stress the point that we heard mostly lot coverage and green space were some of the things that you were, that the lot coverage was, we were asking, so I'll just go over those. We were asking 66% lot coverage as opposed to the 50% that's allowed. Today, we're coming in with a project that's been reduced in size to 57.4%. The green space was a requirement of 25%, and in the previous design, we were at 11%. And today, we're happy to say that our green space is at 34%, actually quite a bit over the requirement. Previously, on the side yards, our side yards were almost 0 lot line on one side and 2.5 feet on the other side. That would have meant the definition of row house, but it wouldn't have met the definition of a non-row house building. Today, we've increased our side yards to 7 feet and 5'6". So regardless of row house or non-row house, we meet the side yard setbacks. The rear yard setback, we have increased from 8.5 feet to the face of the building to 10 feet from the face of the building. I will point out again that the building next door, the Lux, is about 5'6" from the property, from the alley or the property line. So by comparison, our neighboring building on that side is actually, a good 4.5 feet closer to that alley than our project would be. And then finally, on the issue of row house, we believe that this is a minor deviation from the definition of row house, but we've been talking with Megan and technically we don't meet the definition of row house. Precedent in the city of Ithaca, I just wanted to share, where is this image? By example, I believe this was a project on College Ave that met the definition of row house. And I think it's just a good example when we're talking about what this definition is. It's that the building have at least, and Megan, you can correct me if I say something wrong, at least 3 modules, and those modules are sort of the vertical expression on the facade that you see, and that each of the modules will have an entrance. And some of the ways that, we're not technically meeting the definition of row house is an interpretation that each module will have residential units either on the ground floor or stacked above. And one of our modules does have an exit stair as opposed to an apartment unit that I'll show you in just a minute in the elevation. But this is an example of a 4-story building with a basement that met the definition. It has entrances, but it did have a non-residential apartment entrance in the form of there is a basement entrance that is not entering into an apartment unit. Hang on, let me just go back to our project design. So when you look at our building elevations, sorry, that elevation is loading. Sorry, it's grinding a little bit. Well, maybe I'll go to the title sheet. I think it'll load faster. Yeah, so you are seeing that, the building has 3 modules and really almost a 4th module. There are entrances into these units, but there's a stair that you can't see in this elevation that's tucked back around the corner. And that's one of the things that's not allowing us to strictly meet the definition of a row house. I won't dwell any more on the row house. I'm sure that's something that you guys will want to discuss. Tom, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I'm Tom Cavell from Holt. Steve, I think you covered it. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, with that, David, I'll end our presentation and
Okay.
we can proceed. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Would board members want us to keep the screen share, or is that helpful for board members?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. So just right off the bat, any questions from board members to the appellants? Yeah.
Yeah, on slide 14, in terms of the rear setback, you've got it listed as 10 feet. If the back patios were not there, would you hit 20 feet? It looked like you did.
No, I believe that is so the property line.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Andre, the property line is here and our building face is 10 feet.
Sorry, I'm a new member, so that was
that's okay. That's okay.
not a great one.
Okay.
You're good. Anybody else? Do you mind just going back to the slide that shows the footprint?
Yeah.
With the green space. And can you just tell us exactly what counts in this drawing as your green space? Anything highlighted in green? Is that what we're?
Yeah, I believe it's everything in green. And on the chart, you will see that we also calculated, because in the definition of green space, I forgot what it was. There's a percent, I think it's sort of saying that within a green space, you might have a sidewalk that it goes through it. It does allow you to, I can't remember what the percentage was, to include a certain percentage of hardscape. So we're, even without the hardscape, we're at 25.5%. And then we do have, like, we included the patio, which is meets the definition of green space at 34%.
Okay. All right. So just to be clear again, read back to us the variances you're seeking or will be seeking based on feedback or eventual, application, and then where your numbers stand once more.
Sure. So the first one, as Megan pointed out, we're saying we believe we're sort of a minor deviation from the definition of row house, but we're technically not a row house. So in terms of building length, a row house would allow 100 feet. Any other structure would allow 45 feet. And our front elevation is 71 feet 9. So that's one ask. The lot coverage is 50% allowable. And we were originally at 66.7. Today we're at 57.4. So we're 7.4% over the 50% lot coverage. And the rear setback. So the rear setback, our requirement is 20 feet or 20%. And we are at 10 feet to the building face. And as I mentioned, our neighboring building is 5'6" from that line. So it's building length, rear yard, and lot coverage.
Okay, so it's a 50% rear yard deficiency. Is that correct? You've got 10, you need 20.
Correct.
Okay. And then building length 45 is allowed, and you're at 71 exactly.
71 foot 9.
Okay.
David, can I just add something about green space since the board asked what counts, and I had to just double check the percentage myself, but Steve is correct that you can, of the green space requirement, 75% must be softscape plantings, trees, shrubs, grass, that kind of thing. Up to 25% can be pedestrian amenities such as patios and sidewalks. Nothing that can be used for parking or anything like that. But as he noted, the patio technically counts since it's under that 25%.
Gotcha. Okay. Are there any other questions from board members? Or should I open this up to public comment, and then we can, go back and sort of deliberate further and then integrate that into our feedback? No. Megan, let's see. Can we open up the public hearing then? And then again, this will be held until May 3rd, correct?
Sure. Yes, that's correct. So I did circulate late this afternoon one comment from a representative of an adjacent property owner. I'm not going to read that into the record because that person also signed up to speak here and is here to speak. So
I will admit him now.
okay. Okay.
I also, so you know, I will have the timer running. So
Thank you, Anya. Okay.
Thank you, Anya.
See Mr. Smith still connecting to audio, so oh, there we go. Okay. All right, Mr. Smith, you have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I represent 222 Dryden Road LLC. So that's the neighbors. You're looking at this to the left. And we oppose the issuance of the variance because it's very substantial, and we think it's not consistent with the character of the neighborhood in terms of the planning considerations. So jumping right into it, the lot coverage variance that they're asking for is still very large. To be asking for 57% coverage, which is 15% above the requirement. If you go back to the application for 232 Dryden, which is the building immediately to the right, you go into the minutes of this board in October of 2019, And they essentially say, well, they're asking for 55%, not even 57%. And the exact quote is, it could be argued that it is or is not substantial, but given the infill nature of that project, the requested variance is going to be considered not substantial. So a smaller variance for coverage, the board is saying we're right on the line, but it's close. We're going to say it's not substantial. I went back 3 years in your minutes. You've never given a lot coverage variance this substantial. This would be precedent setting in that sense. It's certainly not anything similar to an apartment building. The rear yard is a very large variance. It's double, it's half of the requirement. And then the length variance is 58%. So these are undoubtedly substantial variances. When you go through case law, when you start seeing things considered substantial at 10 or 15%, when they're asking for 50%, 58% variances, they're sort of off the chart substantial, right?
1 minute warning.
I think you have to be careful there. The last thing I'll say when it comes to the character of the neighborhood, the architect alluded to this. The Collegetown urban plan assumes that this portion of of this block would be a transitional nature. So you've got very urban streetscape as you move towards the corner with College Ave, and then another block the other direction, they are single family homes, or at least appear to be single family homes from the exterior. And all the planning and all the zoning contemplates a smaller massing with these bulk requirements requiring less lot coverage and shorter widths of buildings. So there's spaces in between. By granting such wildly big variances, you completely defeat that plan. And it's just not a row house. If it was a row house, maybe it would be a different conversation, but it's not what we understand a row house to be commonly under a common conception. This has apartment units in the front and the back. It's a 4-story apartment building. And it doesn't meet when they say technical, it doesn't meet the statute either. I hear my time's up. I appreciate
That is your time.
letting me comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Megan, does that conclude public hearing? Is there any other comments or letters?
So that is all we have received today. Again, we'll keep the public hearing open for people that wish to comment either in support or opposition to the project through the next date. So, however, since that comment was in opposition, the appellants are welcome to have a few minutes to rebut any testimony.
Sure. How does the project team wish to comment and reply?
I guess in terms of I think the fact that the side yards, that in a as of right project, you could build to within 5 feet of the property line, suggests that depending on the dimensions of this parcel, you could have a building face as of right that would go from, almost one end of the property to the other. With regard to the row house, I think we're just trying to suggesting that for all intents and purposes, it is similar to that project on College Ave, other than that our stairs face the street, which you can barely see because they're tucked sort of back around the corner, which also diminishes the visual impact of the building on the street. But I think most importantly, when you're weighing the benefits to the applicant versus the detriment of health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood, again, I think bringing accessible apartment units to this, this sloping site, which is barely accessible itself, I think is a great benefit to the community. And the fact that there are challenges of being able to bring this building to the street face that, we're sort of fighting in terms of the development of the building. And I think that's all I had to add. And, I don't know, Tom, if you had anything else to add. But we thank you all for your time tonight.
Thank you. And as Megan alluded to, should more comments come in, you'd have a chance to reply to those as well at our next meeting. We're slated, are we slated for a vote on this come May 3rd, or based on our feedback, would there be another rendition of this project, or how would this work?
Well, I think it would be helpful for the project team tonight to hear your feedback, things changes that you're supportive of, things that you might have concerns about, and then they can take that feedback and between now and the next meeting, decide if they feel any additional changes are necessary, or if the design, they'd like to move forward with it. And right now it's tentatively scheduled for May 3rd, but I'd certainly be working with the project team for the date that works best for how they want to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Stephen. Any thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I do appreciate the revisions that were made that addressed what we had talked about at the last time we saw this project. I think that the side yard adjacent to 222 should be considered, since that was brought up in the public comment. Well, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Okay. Joe, what about you?
I've been going back and forth on this one. I don't know how helpful I'm honestly gonna be, because it's like a lot of it comes down to like row house or not. And I see the point that it's, well, we're so close to being a row house, and it almost feels like if you could get a variance for that, I'd be a lot happier. But we're not here to discuss that right now. I found the opposition to be persuasive in the sense that like the percentages as far as the differences in what the requirement is and what the ask is are substantial. I can't really overcome that part of it. But at the same time, it's like if it became a row house and I could envision it more closely to that, I think I'd be just overall a lot happier with it. And that just could be as simple as like persuasion on my end to consider it, to view it more as a row house. But in my head, that's just not how I'm picturing it at this point. So, but again, I've been going back and forth on that. It's just been a tough one for me. I've been waffling on it since I looked at it.
Okay. Mike?
Am I on? Yeah. I've made a decision on this one. This is a much better, more palatable solution than we saw before, where everything was pushed out to the edge. That is such a strange block. I remember the Lambros building their townhouse kind of structure just down the street here, and the summit hill was, it was like there were no lot lines or anything up there 20 years ago. It's all carved up now, and it's a very attractive development site, but it isn't what it used to be. I could be convinced. I need to think about it some more.
Okay. And Don, what about you, Andre?
Yeah, so I used to live on Bryant Ave when I was in undergrad. So, I've seen this property kind of sit in its current form for roughly the last decade. I think that's a testament to how hard it is to build on this site. I don't envision a world in which someone builds a substantial multifamily building with a 20-foot setback and a 45-foot width requirement. I think the exterior perspectives where you see the building relative to the two developments next to it sort of highlights how much this is in neighborhood character. I think the benefits to the community are substantial. I can't think of any significant drawbacks. I think given how much of the frontage you're losing because of the slope, 57 to 50 doesn't seem like a substantial allowance given the property's characteristics. And, my stepbrother lives in Philly. I spend a lot of time in Philly. This looks like a row house to me. If it's 75% of a row house, 75% of 100 feet, seems reasonable. I have no problems with this project.
Okay. Thank you. I guess, can we just go back? Why can't you get back to the row house definition, right? Even if it appears like one, I mean, what is preventing you ultimately from getting back into that classification? And as, I don't know, as frustrating as that getting into that classification might be, if it's what it takes to get you into a different class of building, why haven't we gotten there?
Just one second. Is my mic on? Okay, my mic is on. I am going to try to load that elevation that took a while. And you know, Tom, maybe you might want to weigh in here too. But and also Megan, just so that I don't misstep, because you and I have talked a little bit about the row house definition. But
Yeah.
my understanding is, as long you know, this red portion of the building meets the definition of the modules that are required to meet the definition of row house, and they need to have what they say, a street entrance. And I believe, you know, and Megan, you can tell me if you agree, we do have entrances on the street. There's a ramp leading up to this. It's impossible to connect at the street because there's actually a retaining wall. I believe it's owned by the city on that part of the property. And then of course we do have a building entrance. And so we have an exit stair at this end of the building, David. And then, you know, what you're not seeing here is back around the corner, which is going to
Steve,
be.
we're not seeing your screen, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me share.
Thought it was just me not knowing what the red
No.
part of the building was. So.
No, I'm sorry.
But I agree with what he's saying.
Okay, I'm going to share. My apologies. Okay, tell me, is it coming up now?
Not yet. Not
It's coming.
Yep.
Okay, so my apologies. So you know, clearly these 3 bays are all apartment units. They have connections to the street. We have entrances in this module, but the pieces that are not meeting the definition is that the 2 ends of this building have egress stairs. From a design standpoint, we've pushed this stair to the back of the site. So, you know, from the street perspective, for the most part, you know, this is going to be hard to see. But that's one of the elements that does not, because it doesn't have a street entrance and it's not an apartment unit, therefore that doesn't meet the definition of a row house module. And it is those stair elements that are why we're not meeting the definition.
Okay. Megan, can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, just again, going back to the overall intention of it and how we got where we're at.
So the row house was intended to be kind of individual stacked, as the term is modules, at least 3 in a row, which you do see here visually. It does specifically state that each module must be a single dwelling unit, either multi-story or stacked apartments, basically. So while I certainly see the intent that was here, it's hard to say that this meets this when you have 2 modules that are not residential. I will say that, and I think most of the staff in our department would say that this idea of allowing kind of a row house incentive in the CR4 district in College Town is not working. I don't know how the applicants could, to meet, you know, with the elevator and accessibility requirements, it could be, it's a challenge to meet that. And it's not something I think that is working out the way those that were involved in wanting to encourage the row house type of development in College Town are envisioning. And honestly, it's probably a change that will be coming forward soon, is to address this in some way. But yes, I mean, you know, is what I have to do is apply the definition. And while I believe the intent might have been there, it doesn't strictly meet the definition. So we can't consider a row house and give it that bonus, so to speak, of the additional building length and side yard.
David, could I mention something?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, you know, and Megan and I have talked about this, and I think, you know, we've chosen not to debate the definition. I would say that in the definition is the modules within a row house may consist of a single dwelling or may contain multiple dwellings, and that it said, you know, in the it needs to be composed of at least 3 modules. And, you know, at least in the beginning of the project, we were feeling like we have 3 modules that are residential. And I guess I'm honing in on the word may. Does that mean that every single module needs to be residential? Or does it mean that the modules may be residential?
And, you know, it's certainly, as Steve and I and Tom had talked, like, they're certainly welcome to bring that decision as an appeal to the board. And I take no offense to that. I interpreted it based on my understanding of the definition and my understanding of the discussion around this point. So I certainly would, you know, if they would like to appeal that determination to board, they're certainly welcome to do so, and I'm happy to help with that.
Megan, this is Tom. It's in your interpretation that our main building entrance, as you mentioned, to the elevator and to the access to the units, is where the cursor is in that left module. Are you interpreting that building entrance isn't fitting the row house definition, where the cursor is at the stair? To the right of that are bedrooms that happen to be, if you look at the floor plans, happen to be bedrooms as part of that first module to the right. So it is part of a unit. It is not itself a unit, but it is residential, and there is an entrance. So that was our take on that module on the left, fitting within the definition of the row house. But if that's not the way you're interpreting it.
I would have to look at the floor plans again. I'm sorry, it's been a while since we discussed it. I think the piece on the end too, well, again, I completely understand the need for the fire access stair, without, you know, that was another piece that I would certainly be willing to look at the other end. Again, I can't remember the floor plans, I'm sorry. But I know the other end, you know, that module is not meeting the definition. But so I mean, again, I understand the intent to meet that definition. I can understand, you know, the difficulties in doing so, particularly with the site. But I felt that I wasn't able to say that this was going to meet the letter of the definition.
Thank you, Megan. Do you mind going off of screen share?
Yes.
Thank you. Does any board member want to respond to that? And then I can offer some of my further questions. No? The property line you mentioned, that was only 5 feet setback, right? So you've got your 10-foot setback, and then you said the building is located 5 feet from that line. That's a side yard setback, correct, for the Lux?
In terms of the, let me go back to I have the plan. I'm sorry, David. I think what we were talking about, our building is 10 feet setback from the rear property line. The right next door to it, where you saw the Lux in the site plan, the back of that building is 5.5 feet from the same property line. So that building, I don't know the history of that building, but
so that's a rear yard setback for that.
That's the rear yard setback of the Lux is only 5'6". So
we were a 5 yard or a 5 foot setback.
Yeah.
Rear yard
I do have an image of that. I know you had me turn off screen share. Do you want to see that?
No, it's good. I'm just
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments from board members or? Okay. I would say personally for me, I think it's a great project, great design, difficult site, costly to build. But you're still dealing with some issues that might have a legislative fix to them, right? Might have some help down the road, but as it stands, you're asking for substantial asks that go beyond your property rights. And that's a accident of the zoning perhaps, or an accident of how this new definition is being applied. But essentially they're trying to curtail the size of your structure, the zoning is, as I read it, through things like rear yard setbacks, lot coverage, building length. Those all pertain to the amount of units and people that you can house within a structure. So they're trying to curtail, the city's trying to curtail density through these positions, and you're sort of at a juxtaposition and caught in the crosshair. So, and as much as I understand that it resembles a row house, it's still, if it can't get all the way through the bureaucracy of getting to that definition, then you're coming up against some of these challenges like building length and so forth. That's just my reading of it. Again, I love the building. I love the project. I think it's great. But you might still have the votes. I don't know, but I would probably have to vote no on some of these asks. The 57%, or so the 7% overage on overall lot coverage, I can justify that. One thing that might help you if you decide to bring this to the board for a vote, I would like to have, if you do come in May, I think that we should vote on this, unless of course you tabled it. But one thing that might help you is if you're really trying to push the idea of hardship for a building that doesn't exist, maybe bring your pro forma, maybe bring your costs, maybe, I don't know if the owner of this property envisioned the difficulties. I'm always interested to sort of hear what the initial intake is with architecture firms. Early on, what is sort of the warning to going and building something this size? Like how did your firm arrive at this building size? And at what point could you have designed a smaller project, or did you go big to begin and then start scaling it down and you'll eventually scale it down more to get through this, this forum, or what? But does that make sense?
Yeah. Were you saying we should be prepared to discuss that, or did you want me to try to answer any of that?
I can't tell you what to do. I mean, I'm always interested, right? And I think it's also important for the public to hear, because if you're asking for something that goes beyond our property rights, then I think the public at a certain point should be informed of what are the actual challenges of providing housing in this community, in this topography, in this zoning landscape, in this cost structure, right? What's actually on the back end of providing housing? And that's what the applicant is trying to do, right? You're trying to take a spot and utilize it and create density, right? So where is the dichotomy between stated goals and like Megan said, right, maybe this one definition, this one implementation tool for building classification isn't working out, right? So how does this exemplify where the reforms need to happen? But in the meantime, this is the rubric that you're operating under. That's my take. So
okay.
Board members, any thoughts? Is that Joe, Stephen? We'll let them. We'll move on here shortly, I think, because it's not a voting item. But
I'm on the fence currently. That's all I can say.
Okay, Andre.
Yeah, I being new to the board, I mean, our job on some level is to interpret the zoning department's interpretation of code, right? We are an appeals body. I'm
Yeah,
just
so
looking at the city website on our, reviews,
that's
interpretation to code.
Yeah, we have our criteria and a thin purview, but Megan,
Yeah.
if I can elaborate on that.
There's two different types of appeals. So they're applying for right now, there's multiple types of appeals, excuse me, not just two. But so there's appeal for an area variance where the agreement is that the requirement is not met. The other option is to appeal a decision of the zoning administrator or other staff that you disagree with that initial determination that was made. So those are two different types of appeals. Both come to this board. We certainly see, the area variance and sign variance requests more frequently, but it is, should the applicants wish to do so, they can certainly submit an appeal of the determination.
Yeah, I guess on some level, like having a little more context on how close you guys actually think this gets to a townhouse and why you're not there on a very technical level, right? Like there's fire requirements and all sorts of stuff that's preventing you from getting there that I wasn't there at the last meeting when you first introduced this, but I feel like if you can convince everyone that this is a townhouse pretty close, I think your job is easier.
Okay.
Stephen and then Joe, and then we'll probably wrap it up.
Yeah, I think I still think that they made good amendments to their project. Good changes. I do want to echo your point to your point that trying to prove hardship for a building that doesn't exist, seeing the numbers of why a certain amount of units works versus a smaller amount that would meet the zoning wouldn't work would be helpful, not just for this project, but all projects moving forward. If we could get that from everybody.
Thank you. Kirby, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, like I could wake up tomorrow and be totally fine with it, and I could wake up the next day and go the other way. It's there. It's like I can see it as a row house. I can see it not as a row house. If it is a row house, like I'm fine with it, or if I can envision it better. If I can't, it's hard to say yes to everything. Like I think what Dave said earlier before we really dug into this, I agreed with, but then I agree with seeing why these asks are necessary rather than just like, here's what we got. Figure it out, guys. That's just kind of where I'm at.
Okay.
And if I can just jump in for a second to clarify, I do want to make clear that it is per Megan's interpretation, not a row house. So the board isn't in a position currently to consider it as a row house when it's been determined that it isn't. That said, if the applicants wish to challenge that determination, then it would be before the board whether or not it's a row house. But that's just not the procedural posture that you guys are currently in.
I just want to be clear when I'm saying that, I'm saying it that like when I look at it in my brain, it's not even like, I know we're not dealing with a row house, but I'm not even picturing one portions of the time. I'm not arguing definitions or anything like that.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify because I think I want to Andre's point as well.
Yeah, I guess my argument is that it is close enough to a row house that I think that it's a reasonable variance to grant in terms of not that it is a row house. So, yeah.
Okay. David, would it be appropriate to ask a quick question?
Yeah, please.
When what we were saying in terms of, is it, I forgot the language, in terms of, is it a substantial ask? And when you are talking about the row house, that's where you could say, because you say it doesn't meet the definition, if you only look at the variance numerically, then you say it's substantial. does it, I mean, does anyone buy the argument that it's not substantial in terms of like, this thing is practically a row house? But I'm not disagreeing with Megan right now. I'm saying, we're not this moment disagreeing with her definition, but we're saying it's really close. Like when you look behind those windows, it just happens to be a stair and not an apartment. So I guess, that's what I'm asking. Do you think there's the argument that it's not substantial in terms of the definition of row house? Or is that just not even a method of considering?
The way we looked at it. Oh yeah, go Joe.
I was gonna say, I think that's kind of to Victor's point right now, that it's not a row house. Like we can't say, well, it's almost a row house, so you get this variance that way. Like it's not a row house, so that 71-foot building length means that it's a very substantial ask at that point. Like I'm kind of in the world where you're in, Steve, but it's not a row house, so we can't view it as, well, it's almost a row house, so this actually isn't a necessary variance at that point, right? And that's where it's stuck.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so you would.
I think that was the part I was trying to get at earlier, where it was like, if we were looking at, is it a row house, is it not a row house, and then asking for that variance and then asking for the other variance.
Okay.
Yeah, we're operating under the presumption that it isn't, the determination that it isn't. So you're going to be coming on May 3rd. If you don't change your project, you'll be coming for about the 7% overage on lot coverage, a 50% deficiency for rear yard, and roughly I did the math at 60%. I don't know if that math is give or take some overage on building length. So based on the criteria, I don't see how I can vote in favor of at least two of those, regardless of my opinion of the building. I think it's a great design, but that's where I would stand should this come to a vote on May 3rd. But again, there's four other board members that you could lobby, and you do have time before that next meeting. Does anybody have anything else before including the appellant? Any questions, and then I think we probably should move on to the next topic.
No, I just thank you all for your comments, because it prepares us best for next month. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Megan, is there anything else with this one?
No, I'll be in touch with Tom and Steve about next steps, and we can figure out, just talk that through in the coming days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
So then moving on, that brings us to appeal number 3203, which is 325 Dryden Road / 320 Elmwood. Before we begin, Andre, is there anything you were going to bring up, or?
Yeah, I'm going to abstain from this one. I think I sat in on like the second one, but they've had so many comments that I can't get up to speed fast enough. So yeah.
It's all good. Megan, you don't have to sign off or anything. You're just not going to participate, correct?
That's right. He doesn't need to leave. He can just observe. That's fine.
Cool. All right. So then if the appellant is in the waiting room, we'll get him in there. We'll do another roughly 5-minute presentation, followed by questions and another public hearing.
I see. All right. Jason's coming in now, I think. And we have Greg and Chris. All right. Can you all hear us okay? Okay, great. So we'll turn it over to you.
Sorry, I might have missed something.
Oh, you're up, Jason. You can do
okay,
your presentation. 5 to 10 minutes, please.
Okay, sharing my screen. All right. So I'm going to start by showing where we left off. The last time we were before the board was in January. And this was the revision we had pitched. At the time, we went back to individual lots. Let's zoom in a little bit here for you. We reduced the building down by 13.4 feet to get that building length down. But just as a refresher, we've got a front yard. Actually, I think I'll skip over that. So we were reducing the building, trying to reduce lot coverage, trying to reduce building length. And then one thing that we lost in the going back to individual parcels, which eliminated the spacing between buildings variance, was the ability to tie the two properties together to try to make it act as one, since we're underdeveloping in terms of lot coverage, the 320 parcel. So, and I think David had commented that tying it together as we originally proposed had some merit. And so, in response to the feedback that we received last time, we came up with this new proposal. So give that a second to pop up. So a few things that I did here was parking seemed to be one of the bigger concerns. We've got three big variances. We have 6 total. The parking, the lot coverage, and the building length were the three variances of greater concern. So one thing I wanted to do with this revision was space the building. So I made a little adjustment to the east wing of 325, pulling it away. So we no longer have that spacing between buildings variance. And that kept the 320 building at 5 feet, although that's a 3rd floor cantilevered bay window, and it's 7 feet predominantly on what is the former yard. And you can actually see the footprint of the existing structure that's there. And I should note the lighter green that you see is the existing paving. So we're building the parking lot within the existing parking area. So the other thing that we did with this was we went back to using the existing curb cut. And what that allowed us to do was gain another parking space in this existing parking area. And it also provided access to the freed up area that we couldn't take advantage of for parking. So I was able to squeeze in the ADA space up there, since the 325 building is required to be accessible. So, that's a big part of that project. So we're now up to 6 spaces. And technically, when I made this submission, I had a math error in my head because it was kind of ironic. The parking and driveway, the impervious cover that's on 320, I've got the note here, it adds up to 1544. Well, 1545 is the green space. Sorry, let me just, 1545 is both lot coverage and the green space maximum. So I got a little confused. We actually have more of a surplus. I didn't want to violate the green space requirement, but technically I can put another parking space right here, a parallel space along the driveway. We don't want to construct it because we've always contended that we don't need the parking. And then the fact that we've gone from 4 to 6 spaces was a big improvement. But I just wanted to point out a 7th space is possible. Let's see. So with this, we didn't change the building length in any way. But I think that really covers the bigger thing here. But let me go over the other variances again. The front yard, we've got this corner pushed over, but that's consistent with the character of the neighborhood. All the buildings down Dryden Road, or not all of them, but a bunch of them have that same amount of encroachment, and it's just one corner. So overall, we've got more front yard area than what is required by zoning. So that's the front yard. The rear yard returns now with the consolidated. So we need 20 feet in the back here. We only have 5, or really, I would say 7, with that cantilevered 3rd floor predominantly. along what was the former side yard with 318 Elmwood here. And then the planning board last month accepted the landscape compliance method to allow the parking to encroach into the yard. So technically we do have a 20-foot yard for a good portion of the site, but then it does shrink down to 7 feet. Again, it's a former side yard. I'll remind everyone that in the current form, 320's rear yard is on the west or the left side here. And we've met with the neighbor at 106 Harvard, and they're perfectly fine with the project. They've sent a letter of support, and we're going to screen their property, from what really is a continuation of the current condition, a parking area. So in my mind, the rear yard is truly more this west side of 320, but the dynamics change with zoning when you consolidate. So you got the rear yard variance. Coupled with the rear yard is the vegetative buffer. We really have 10 feet, along the parking, and that's going to serve as a stormwater absorption area. And that is part of the benefit of vegetative buffers. Traditionally, I don't know, there's not a lot of information in the code about what the vegetative buffer is supposed to be. And then along the building, we've got 7 feet. So anyway, that's vegetative buffer. There's front yard, there's rear yard. I covered that. And then the other 3, lot coverage for the CR3 parcel, 325 Dryden at the top here, building length for CR3, and then the parking overall. So I just wanted to do a quick summary of where we're at with this. And I thought I would just start with the 3 real minor variances in our opinion. But I wasn't sure if the board wanted to approach this project by going one by one, or should I just offer up my points and then we go from there. We could go back and forth one by one, or should I just do the overall?
I think we're past 5 minutes, so let's just do an overall refresher of what we're going for, and then
Sure.
If you could leave up for screen share the layout so that we can sort of point to it when we start asking questions. You were going to lay out just real quick. Again, remind us all the different asks.
Yeah, so you've got the front yard variance, this red corner. You've got the rear yard variance in the CR2 portion for the 320 building at the bottom. You've got the vegetative buffer that's impacted by the building encroaching in. We've got lot coverage at 45.3% versus the 40 max. We've got building length here at 61, and the mitigation is steps and landscaping as part of it, and I have a little bit more. So 61 versus 45 max. And then the parking requirement, we have 10 dwellings, 26 occupants in the 325 building. We have 2 dwellings and 6 occupants in the 320 building. So the 320 building requires 2 spaces, and then the 325 building requires 11. So that was one thing that, I forgot to mention that we reconfigured the apartments a little bit. We were being penalized with 2 and 1 bedroom units. So I converted I converted 2 2s into 1 bedroom, and that got rid of one of the parking space requirements. So the parking requirements down to 13 required, and we have 6 or 7 if I add that other space on site. And then, as I'm sure you recall, the residential parking permits system provides the opportunity for 4 on-street spaces. So parking is the last variance.
Okay, thank you. If you could just leave that up, and then we'll go around the room. Let's start with Mike. Any questions? Comments?
The improvements are reassuring. Happy to see some parking is in there. Yeah, I think I could support this.
Okay. Joe?
I'll say I'm a lot closer than I was. I agree that there's three smaller ones that are pretty straightforward. Jason, I hate to do it. Could you just run through the parking situation and how you were going to get from can you show me how you were going to get from 6 to 7?
Yeah, actually sketch that in. There we go. I had a different sheet here in the packet. I blew it up so you guys could see it because it was getting lost in the graphics. But the optional parking space is right here. 20 feet long is what you need for a comfortable parallel space. So a vehicle could come in and park in or nose in, whatever. So you can actually create a space here. There's a walkway right here that I forgot to show in this graphic. So I wanted to be beyond that, but there's plenty of room to get that in there. Again, we're not going to construct it unless it was needed, if there was an issue, but we still believe, the planning board was supportive of transportation demand management and all. So yeah, but that's where that 7 space would reside. And then you got the 5 here and then the 1 ADA up here, which makes more sense because I've got the lift moved to the front.
Okay.
Stephen?
Yeah, I would agree with Michael that they've made changes that are make it a lot more palatable of an ask for me.
I agree with Joe, right? Some of these are very straightforward asks, in my opinion. Others just pertain to the, the overall density of the project. Yeah, so I think some of these are, full send, others are, we'll just keep talking it through. I do think we're going to vote one way or another tonight on all the different variances, all the different requests. So with that in mind, should we open this up to public hearing and then, so public comments and then written comments? And then I guess if you don't mind just Xing out of screen share, and then if we need, we might call it back.
Okay.
Thank you.
You ready to move on to the public hearing, David? Were you
Yes,
saying
please.
anything? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
No, you're good.
So we do not have anyone signed up to speak in either support or opposition. We did not receive any written comments in support, but there were 2 written comments in opposition. I can read them now. They're relatively short. So, dear BZA, I think regarding the parking variance request for Appeal 3203, I think cutting the required number of spaces by more than half is too big of an ask for this project. And until the parking studies get translated into new zoning regulations, I think we should stick with the current regulations. In this few block area, there isn't enough parking to accommodate even more than a handful of additional residential permit cars. Parking is on one side of the street and only the small section by the Elmwood house is 24 hours. I'm not comfortable with it will be okay because students are not bringing cars, casual stance. The fact that rented spaces are going unrented is not necessarily a correlation. My experience is that there's always parking pressure in these blocks. And that was from Martha Frommel. Dear members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, the variances applied for at 325 Dryden Road and 320 Elmwood Avenue should be denied for the following reasons. 1, the structures that are being proposed for this neighborhood are simply too big. 2, the once private homes they are replacing will now become truly commercial apartment buildings, aka student housing, and will significantly and irreversibly change the character of the Bell Sherman Bryant Track residential areas forever. These areas originally designed, designated, and zoned by the city of Ithaca for private homes and families are being converted into commercial apartment housing, the urbanization of Ithaca. There is nothing minimal about the total demolition of 2 existing structures, not to mention the needed huge excavators and big truck transportation of the huge amount of former housing debris and new materials through limited space, where narrow streets with strange intersections and extremely limited one-side parking, Elmwood Avenue, Harvard Place, Bryant Avenue, Dryden Road, are the only means of egress and ingress to the demolition construction area. All the streets in this area were designed primarily for single-family residents. Thus, the streets were designed for slow passage of 2 vehicles and extremely limited on-street parking. Wear and tear on the city of Ithaca's infrastructure is significant. The water and sewer capacities have to be at or near capacity. The streets are in terrible condition. Look at Oak Avenue, College Ave, or most every street in Ithaca. Who pays for the essential upgrades? The townspeople, not the developers. Who suffers through the demolition? Look at the new property assessments for the multi-million-dollar sales of properties, whereby the assessments are not even close to the selling prices of these newly developed properties. Yet there are increasingly outrageous assessments for private homes in Bell Sherman, Bryant Track, and the College Town areas. 4, unfortunately, Ithaca's TDMP, the Transportation Demand Management Plan, though thought-provoking in principle, is a total failure in reality, unsuited and unadaptable for this very densely populated and confined area of East Hill. The streets of the area are already technically too small for the number of vehicles that use them, including those with legal valid parking permit stickers to park on the street. Driveways are constantly blocked with cars. 5, the RPPS, the residential parking permit system, is simply a band-aid approach to deal with a severe hemorrhaging problem. As such, it is not a cure as much as it is a reaction to an acute problem. Much of this is because of flawed and untrue beliefs that Cornell students have cars, that few Cornell students have cars. My grandson perhaps said it best, things are really messed up. The truth is that greed is the primary mover of all development in College Town, Bryant Park, and Bell Sherman areas, where space is so limited that in order to continue, movement has to be pushed into the areas that were residential and once had green space, as well as needed parking for the residents. Excuse me. It appears as if one doesn't live or work in an area and there is a potential profit involved, then it is fine to denigrate an old neighborhood, for old zoning restrictions are meaningless and no longer apply. Therefore, if this is your belief, all zoning restrictions to these entire neighborhoods should be removed, and all the properties should be rezoned to allow commercial apartment dwellings. Once this is done, then it may be time to deal with affordable housing. Respectfully submitted, Dr. James Orcutt. And those were the comments I have. I do have from the planning board. Planning board continues to not identify any negative long-term planning impacts and supports this appeal as they did in November 2021. The planning board accepts the applicant's reasons for requesting the landscape compliance methods for the parking area and will require the applicant to provide additional plannings in addition to the proposed fencing.
Thank you. Let's see here. Megan, so I'm looking through the draft forms. And I guess, yeah, just to remind board members that we do have a deliberation guide and we can take in previous comments from previous meetings before we really start to deliberate. I guess, you know, we might all, it's not as though we'll agree on every single line item here, right? And that's okay because there's I'm counting 6 asks. So we're just going to go through point by point. I'm looking at lot coverage, Megan. So this is back.
Sorry, David, can I back up for just 1 minute?
Please.
I was wondering if we could give Jason, Greg, and Chris, if they would like an opportunity to
I'm
respond
sorry.
to the public comment.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, do you mind if I share my screen?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so, you know, obviously parking was, you know, one of the comments we've addressed. It was both in both of the comments. So obviously we're trying to address that. I just want to talk about some of what I put on this graphic that was submitted, the rationale component and everything. But, you know, the planning board they were actually asking us to propose a TDMP, even though that's not a provision in zoning. But some of the other things that I had mentioned in the write-up in the submission here was, unlike a restaurant or an office where trip generation occurs offsite, and you need to accommodate those cars arriving. Otherwise, those businesses don't survive. That's a very different thing as compared to housing. You know, if there's no parking to be rented and students don't want to rent, then the project fails. But these projects are proven to work without the parking. So that's what I'd say about that. Oh, and I will just say the city allocates 4 residential parking permit system spaces, on-street spaces, to the 320 parcel. We're not saying we're gonna need them or necessarily use them. That's an option that the renters have. And I also just wanted to note that, you know, we're trying to design to fit a certain market segment, not trying to design those 3-bedroom apartments as much, you know, and trying to have these 2 bedrooms. But when you look at 26 occupants overall, that works out to 9 spaces. So if zoning were to allow 1 for every 3 occupants, but it's not how it works. But if we had designed it that way, we'd be debating 9 spaces versus, as I've shown you, 7 spaces on site. So I just want to point that out. Another thing that is very important to counter with the second letter there is these are apartment buildings currently, and as you know, the CR3 zoning changed from only 1 and 2 family dwellings to allow multiple dwellings. So we're not converting housing stock into apartments. We're renewing the building stock to energy efficient, accessible apartments on the 325. So you guys have heard all that from me before. Too big, I don't get. We comply with height. You know, I think contextually, when you look at the renderings, I mean, this is the view from you know, the lower edge of Dr. Orcutt's property. I mean, it's a pretty benign looking building, and then the view from Elmwood fits in the character of the neighborhood. And then I don't understand the big construction impacts and all that, so I'm not gonna rebut any of that. You know, and I would just say in closing, in response to Orcutt's letter, you know, we've made this point before, but you know, his building's about 88 feet compared to 61 across the street in a CR1 zone. It's 61, and we're surrounded by student housing at the 4 corners here. You don't see the intersection, but anyway, I won't take any more time on this.
Greg, I saw you come up. You have something to add?
Yeah, no, I think Jason pointed that out. I just wanted to make sure he touched on the surrounding area building lengths, and then also, you know, I know Dr. Orcutt had written his letter, but I think it's important to point out that he does run a commercial space right across the street. You know, he sort of presented it from the character and community of as a resident there, but he does operate a dentist's office, which, you know, to Jason's point about trip generation and parking and things like that, you can see why, you know, that may be important to him, but there is a commercial space right across the street. And I think it's important to note the previous comments in support, you know, come from the Dryden Road property to the other side to 106 Harvard Place, which they do live there full time. This is the most adjoining and impacted parcel right there. And they did strongly support the project, you know, after we had an opportunity to meet with them and go through things. So I just want to remind that there were positive comments for the project that were previously submitted that, you know, didn't get resurfaced tonight, but appreciate the time.
Yeah, and actually, Greg, you reminded me, just thinking about the too big comment. I did want to point out, even though we're 5.3% over the allowable in total, we have a surplus of green space of 792 square feet, and we're only over lot coverage wise by 286 square feet. So it really balances out. You know, there's 2 metrics in zoning. And, you know, I have to just throw in one more quick comment. You know, the College Town area form district zoning is about form. I don't know that
I'm
it's
gonna-
really, these form provisions are about density, but I just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay. All right, I think what we'll do, if you don't mind dropping this, well, board members, is it helpful to have that up as we deliberate?
No,
Don't need it? Okay, all right.
Okay.
We've seen it. Let's get a sense of where people's heads are at. And then, again, the way we'll do this and the way staff recommended it is we go through the variances one by one, discussing each criterion. We'll deliberate, we'll vote on that requested variance, and then we'll move on to the next. And then, one member can take the lead on each deliberation. And then, but as long as we just have time to kibitz in between. So just initial feedback and ideas as we open this up. Maybe Stephen?
Yeah, I guess I feel fairly positive about the situation. I don't know where everyone else is at, but do you want me to start with one of the variance requests, or?
No, I think I'd like to just hear everyone's thoughts, and then maybe we can all just sort of agree on which ones we think, like are less dramatic asks, and some are deserve more conversation than other, right? I've made a list, but we could go through it. Mike, what are your thoughts as a whole?
lot coverage, front yard, rear yard, and vegetative buffer are all things that I don't have a problem with. Maximum building length is a little trickier, but I don't have a problem with it. The only issue to me is the parking. That's the only one that I'm a little on the fence on. The other ones I can support.
Joe, what about you?
So I'm kind of the opposite of Michael. Given that they could get the RPPS, I would really like to see that 7th spot opened up. That would bring us to 11 of 13 that you're at. So we'd be looking at 2 as a real issue. So I'm at least convincible on that one. Building length, that's hard to justify. It's just straight up, if we get other people coming in asking it this and somebody throws this in my face, I don't know how we justify it. That's just kind of where I'm at.
Okay. I agree with Michael's sentiments, front yard, vegetative buffer, rear yard. Right, I see those as probably pretty easy to get through unless I'm missing something. Lot coverage, right? The idea that, 5.3 over, which translates to a 13.25% overage, or basically going beyond that ask. All right, so lot coverage is debatable. Overall, though, it's tied into building length, which then, as the planning staff sort of allude to, pertains to density. Let's see. Jason, do you have a sense for how much green space is reduced if that other spot is added?
Yeah, it's we're still compliant. We'll have 1579 square feet of green space versus the 1545. So we'll have about 34 square feet
Okay, so if the
additional.
board goes in that direction, it won't create a deficiency on the other end.
Jason, you're saying it would only, adding a 7th spot would only remove 34 square feet of green space?
No, it'll remove 288. So I've got 1867 calculated currently, losing the 288 gets the total down to 1579.
Thank you.
1545 is required, so 34 is the surplus.
Megan, if adding that into as a contingency within a vote on parking, how would that play out?
You could yeah, you could add that in if that makes the difference for people about approving this variance. I would say change the wording of the request to say that the project will be providing 7 spaces on site, 6 in the CR2 and 1 ADA compliant space in the CR3, which was just the description. And that's what'll get written into the final variance.
Okay. Let's see. How do people want to play this? Do you want to start with front yard, rear yard, and vegetative buffer?
Sure.
Okay.
Hey, I'll make a motion on the vegetative buffer.
Okay.
I'll take the easy one, I think. A minimum 10-foot vegetative buffer from the rear property line is required for all properties within the CR districts. Proposed project does not provide sufficient vegetative buffer in the rear yard. The depth of the proposed vegetative buffer will range from 5 to 10 feet. Whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties, I would say no. The rear yard is being consolidated with the current side yard. This area provides approximately the same amount of green space. Proposal will not alter existing conditions. Interested parties have not presented testimony identifying negative impacts caused by this deficiency. The board does not find evidence that undesirable change on the character of the neighborhood caused by the requested rear yard vegetative buffer variance is a problem. Whether the benefits sought can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. The variance is directly related to the applicant's request for a rear yard variance. It's not feasible to provide 10-foot vegetative buffer while providing an 8.9-foot rear yard. Whether the requested variance is substantial, I would say no. The applicant's proposing between 5 and 10 feet of vegetative buffer in the rear yard, with the majority of the rear yard having a vegetative buffer of more than 7 feet. The board does not consider this to be a substantial request. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? I'm going to say no. Little to no impact, and the proposed vegetative buffer is comparable to the existing green space in this location. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. Yes, it is self-created, and the applicant is proposing new construction that does not meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. However, the board finds that there are no substantial impacts of the reduced vegetative buffer, and I so move.
Is there a second?
I can second that.
Okay.
You, Stephen.
I think we're ready to be polled. Megan?
Vegetative buffer, Mr. Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yep.
and Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
Gardner has indicated he's abstaining, so that'll be noted. So that required vegetative buffer is approved.
Okay, so I think now we'll keep moving down the list. And then, yeah, again, so there's only 4 board members voting on this. For each appeal to pass, it needs 3 votes. Correct, Megan? Okay. 3 votes in favor. You want to do front yard or rear yard? Who wants to tackle that one?
I'll do front yard, I guess.
Okay.
So I would make a motion for the front yard. The project site has 1 front yard along Dryden Road and a 2nd front yard along Elmwood Avenue. Both districts require a minimum front yard of 10 feet. The corner of the building projects into the front yard along Dryden Road, creating a minimum front yard of 6.1 feet in this location. The project meets the front yard requirements along Elmwood Avenue. A, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties. I would say no. It is one corner of the building. Will project into the yard by 3.9 feet. It is not in compliance with the zoning regulations, but it's not uncommon in this neighborhood. Interested parties haven't presented identifying any negative impacts. And there's no other undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood caused by it. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. Yes, he could change it to meet the requirement. However, it creates a better project with creates more uniform and I'd say standard units without cutting that side off. Whether the requested variance is substantial, I would say no. I don't think a just under 4-foot corner of a building with the setbacks along the front yard line to be substantial. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? No. The Planning and Development Board did an environmental review and found that it had little to no impacts on the environment and issued a negative declaration of significance in November. And again, that small encroachment doesn't create a negative impact. And whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, again, yes, it's a new project. So just about every request is going to be self-created. And so with that, I would make a motion to approve that variance request.
I'll second the motion.
Ms. Wilson?
So Mr. Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yes.
and Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
All right, so that carries 4-0 with Mr. Gardner abstaining.
You could go
My
next.
turn.
I'm sorry?
Is it my turn?
Yeah, or I can jump in at some point. I haven't done one yet tonight, but
I'll take rear yard. I got it pulled up.
okay.
All right, rear yard. The rear yard for the consolidated lot is located in the CR2 district adjacent to 318 Elmwood Avenue. The proposed site plan shows a rear yard of 8.9 feet of the required 20 feet, which is equivalent to 45% of the required yard setback. Whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties, no. The rear yard of the consolidated lot will be in the location of the current side yard of 320 Elmwood Avenue. The depth of the proposed rear yard is comparable to the depth of the current side yard of the existing two-family dwelling at 320 Elmwood Avenue. Interested parties have not presented testimony identifying negative impacts caused by the rear yard variance. The board does not find evidence of an undesirable change on the character of the neighborhood caused by the requested rear yard variance. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance, no. The applicant has demonstrated that it is not possible to build two structures on the consolidated lot without a rear yard variance. Whether the requested variance is substantial, the requested variance is for 55% of the rear yard. In terms of proportion of the request, this is a substantial variance. However, the board finds that there are no substantial impacts of the rear yard variance request. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? No. Through the environmental review process, the Planning and Development Board determined that the proposed project will have little to no impacts on the environment and issued a negative declaration of environmental significance in November 2021. Because the proposed rear yard is comparable to the existing side yard, the board does not anticipate adverse impacts on the physical environment. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, it always is almost. However, the board finds that there are no substantial impacts of the rear yard variance request. So I will move to accept that variance.
I'll second that.
Great. Mr. Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Kirby,
Yep.
and Mr. Parkin.
Yes.
Yard is also approved 4-0 with Mr. Gardner abstaining. Okay.
Okay, so that takes care of 3 out of 6. What remains is building length, lot coverage. I think one of those is more sizable than the other, though I do view them in tandem. Curious to hear people's thoughts. And then what do people think about the parking variance and then the option to add the contingency? What are people's thoughts on that?
I'd like to see that spot added. So many of the complaints have been about parking, so many issues about that. Any ability to relieve that, I think, is pretty necessary.
Okay. Mike?
So what is the count? I didn't quite understand. Joe, you went through a count. So if we required a 7th spot on site, how many short are we?
So it's 13 overall. Yeah, 13 overall required. There's 7 on site with that additional spot. Then there's the 4 RPPS, I forget what that stands for, additional spots that they could be given, bringing it their total to 11. So then 2 left of the 13 that they don't have.
But please remember that the RPPS, while it can be a mitigation, it does not count as the RPPS, which is the residential parking permit system, is basically a right to hunt, so to speak, system. So like there may or may not be parking spaces available even with the permit.
Okay.
So then if they could get to 7 spots, then they're 46% deficient. Does that sound right there? They've got 7 out of 13.
I'll take your word for it.
Sure. Assuming my math's right. Okay. So, right, I guess you could make the argument that that's substantial, but that the substantial nature of that ask doesn't, deem that it's not something that could be granted, right? If the other criteria enable it to move forward. So.
And again, like Megan said, we could mitigate the issue of that with the RPPS to some extent.
Okay, but it doesn't affect the size of the ask, is how I'm reading that. Yeah, okay. All right. And then building length and lot coverage, right? We can tackle those. Which do people want to do next? You want to get into the parking? That seemed to, I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with the parking with the 7th spot, if that makes sense with that contingency. I'd need help wording it, but
I can get behind that.
Stephen?
I would support that.
Okay. All right, I'll make a motion. Megan, what type of wordage do I need to, I would make a motion in favor of the variance with the condition of the 7th spot.
Yeah, so what I would recommend doing, and I just kind of changed on the form where it lists the summary, is that the proposed project will require 13 off-street parking spaces. The applicant is proposing to provide 7 spaces on site, 6 spaces in the CR2, and 1 ADA compliant space in the CR3. The applicant is requesting a variance from 46% of the required parking. And then you will need to edit and provide your rationale for each one of the 5 criteria.
Okay. All right, I will make a motion to grant the parking variance. Let me just pull up my draft form and I'll edit it on the spot. But off-street parking, the proposed project will require 13 off-street parking spaces. The applicant is proposing to provide 6 spaces in the CR2 district and one ADA compliant space in the CR3 per a contingency of acceptance of this variance request, that one ADA spot or that one additional spot be added from the original ask. Let's see, the applicant is requesting a variance from 46% of the parking requirement. And the criteria is as follows: whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. I argue that no. While parking issues are tight at certain times, the applicant has made an effort to mitigate, is willing to add another spot. And let's see here. Ultimately, the urban centric reality of this neighborhood and its transitional zone, mixed with people's changing parking and vehicular needs, I do feel that there are mitigation efforts in place, and that the street parking options that might be pursued at a later date could help alleviate any undesirable change. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. While as of right scenarios might be doable, the applicant has gone through many renditions of this project, has worked on the issue for months at a time, and we feel due to lot constraints and the reality of zoning that in this case, that the ask could have a feasible alternative, though we are willing to look past that. So the answer to whether or not the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative is yes. I'm sorry, I gotta stop. Megan, what happens if I'm going through my motion form and we hit this threshold that I just can't necessarily justify on the fly from a criteria standpoint?
So there's a couple things. One is, as I'm writing this down, I'm going to circulate it by email before we finalize this to make sure it's correctly capturing, because I know it's very hard to write these on the floor.
Yeah.
But you do, if you're going through the criteria and finding you cannot, I mean, you don't have to have eloquent wording and wordsmithing, but if you're going through the criteria and find you cannot justify the request, that's more of a sign about the request itself, not the wording. So at that point, you might want to just make sure everybody, see if one of your colleagues on the board has thoughts, that kind of thing. Victor, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just, I would also point out that, it's okay that if not every factor is met, you have to consider every factor. You can overall decide to grant or deny a variance, even if some of the factors go the other way.
Okay.
To the extent that's helpful.
Okay. All right. All right. Let me start over here then. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. All right. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative. I say no. In the context of this design and the site limitations, the architect and the project team have worked diligently to explore all alternatives. They have mitigated concerns by being able to add one additional spot, but there is not a feasible alternative. Whether the requested variance is substantial, yes, 46% deficiency is a substantial ask. However, as often the case when discussing parking, the impacts of that substantial nature don't necessarily correlate to a negative outcome. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? No, there are other mitigations in place, such as vegetative buffer to conceal parking, while the addition of a seventh parking space does take away green space. It's a needed contingency and mitigation to the overarching concerns of lack of parking in the neighborhood and utility within the space. And then, was the alleged difficulty self-created? Yes, this is a newly constructed project or proposed project. And it's entirely at the own volition of the appellant. Thoughts, or is there a second to that motion?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay. Megan?
All right, Mr. Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yes.
Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
Off-street parking variance is granted at 7, provided in a variance from the 6 remaining spaces.
Okay, let's do building length. And then again, Megan, you don't always have to have a motion to approve, right? It can also be a motion to deny. Is that?
Yes,
Is
you
that
can make a
correct?
motion either way. And then if
Okay.
you're denying, you can, obviously the factors reflect that.
Okay.
And so what I would recommend, since it did seem there was some disagreement on a couple of these items, is someone can make the motion if someone to either approve or deny based on the factors they identify. If a board member disagrees with that, they can vote in opposition to the motion. So
Okay. Board members, thoughts? I guess I'll be voting no on this item.
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
As much as I see how they're related, the lot area and the building length, if you take one separately from the other, I'm much more concerned about the length.
Okay. I'm willing to make a motion to deny this variance. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, let me just pull up my maximum building length. The CR3 district limits buildings with width to 45 feet in length. This regulation applies to the entire building, not individual facades. The full building length along Dryden Road measures 61 feet, which exceeds that maximum allowed by the zoning ordinance by 16 feet or 35.6%. Whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. Arguably, yes, in the context of neighborhood concerns and public comments, interested parties have expressed said concerns about the impacts of larger buildings. The proposed building is larger than other buildings in the immediate area, which will alter the character of the neighborhood, regardless of existing buildings that may resemble similar lengths. This pertains to the new zoning at hand. So the CR3 district is not an area intended for redevelopment as stated in the College-Town area form districts. Any new construction shall be similar in form and scale, and the zoning requirements of these districts are intended to protect the character of the established residential neighborhoods. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance, yes. While the applicants would prefer to build the new multiple dwelling as proposed, they have not demonstrated that it is not feasible to meet the maximum building length requirement. Whether the requested variance is substantial, yes, the proposed multiple dwelling will exceed the maximum building length by 16 feet or 35.6%. The board considers the requested variance to be a substantial request in a district where redevelopment and increased density are not encouraged. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? I would argue no. The proposed building is larger than other buildings in the immediate area. That said, I don't see it from an environmental standpoint, redistributing, environmental conditions for the neighborhood. And then whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, yes, again, this is a redevelopment project. And while we respect and understand the constraints under which the project team has been operating, there are other options, and it is a self-created hardship that we cannot look beyond. Is there a second to that motion? Or,
Joe would second it, but since it was before, I don't know. Joe, do you still second
Yeah,
or have any changes?
I'll continue my second.
okay. Let's vote.
Okay, Mr. Cannon. Okay, I saw a mouth say no. Mr. Henderson,
No.
Mr. Barkin, I'm sorry, Mr. Kirby, I'm going out of order.
No.
And wait, sorry.
Yeah.
So Joe, are you voting yes? Because again, so if you're
Oh,
voting
wait,
no,
no.
you're.
I'm voting yes to support
Okay.
the reverse. I'm doing it
Motion, okay.
backwards.
And Mr. Barkin,
Yes.
I meant to vote yes in favor of the motion. My no,
I'll repoll.
Should we just
Yeah.
do
I'm
this
gonna
again?
repoll this vote. There's been a motion on the floor by Mr. Barkin, seconded by Mr. Kirby to deny the maximum building length variance. If you vote yes, you are voting to deny the variance. If you vote no, you are voting that you don't support
Grant.
the denial. So not to grant, but that you don't.
Yeah,
So
yes,
Mr. Cannon,
yes, I'm voting to deny.
okay. Mr. Henderson,
I'm gonna vote no still.
okay. Mr. Kirby,
Yes.
and Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
Okay, so the maximum building length variance has been denied with 3 in support of the denial, 1 in opposition, and 1 abstention.
Okay. And we still have one more to go, and that is lot coverage. What are people's thoughts on that?
I can live with, I think I could live with this lot coverage ratio.
Okay. Is there anybody that wishes to make a motion to either deny or grant this variance? And again, this is for lot coverage, which is what, 5.3% over the allowed lot coverage, Megan? Okay.
Correct. Yes, the maximum allowed is 40%. In the CR3 zone, it's coming in at 45.3%.
Okay. Is there a motion either for or against?
I'll move to accept the variance, to grant the variance. All right, so we good for me to start going through it?
Yeah.
All right. Lot coverage by buildings. Lot coverage by buildings is calculated for the portion of the building and lot in each zone, not as a consolidated lot. The lot coverage by buildings in the CR3 zone is 45.3%, which exceeds the maximum 40% allowed by the zoning ordinance. Whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. I'm gonna say no to this one. It is a change, but it's not a substantial change to the overall character of the area. The applicants have provided renderings that show that it does maintain the character of the neighborhood, so yes. Whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. I'm gonna say yes. While the applicants would prefer to build the new multiple dwelling as proposed, they have not demonstrated that it is not feasible to meet the maximum lot coverage by buildings requirement. Whether the requested variance is substantial, I'm gonna say no to this one as well. It's a 5% difference, which in the grand scheme of things is not huge. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? Through the environmental review process, the Planning and Development Board determined that the proposed project will have little to no impacts on the environment and issued a negative declaration of environmental significance in November 2021. And then whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, again, it almost always is. But I think there is mitigating factors, including the overall size of the ask, that outweigh that self-created difficulty. So I will move to grant that variance.
Second that.
I just asked that maybe the board, either as a friendly amendment or Joe, if you could go back to look at, just to provide some support for your, both the requests C and D, that the request is, the variance is substantial. We said no, but we just said that 5% is not huge. If you want to quantify that at all, and then also about the physical environmental condition, something, if there's anything you'd like to add in addition to the planning board seeker determination, I think that might help strengthen the board's decision.
All right, so it was C and D.
Yes, please.
Okay, so C, whether the requested variance is substantial. Again, I said no. We're looking at 40% allowed by the zoning ordinance and 45.3% for the request, a difference of 5.3%. While that is a percentage out there, I don't know. I guess I don't know how else to phrase that one, Megan. I'm not viewing the 5.3% as
Maybe,
particularly large, especially considering the green space area remaining. There we go.
green space, and that it's not, I think I heard you mention in a different criterion that it's not, you don't see a substantial impact or consider a substantial percentage. Is that what I?
Yeah, the green space remaining, that they added parking to the lot as well. So there's still plenty of land use in the overarching scheme. And then D, would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? Again, through the environmental review process, the planning and development board determined that the proposed project will have little to no impacts on the environment and issued a negative declaration of environmental significance in November 2021. Again, I think the building may be larger, but also the mitigation that they used in the overall landscaping of the proposal, I think, does mitigate the overall physical appearance of the project in comparison to the rest of the area.
Sorry if I missed. Mike, were you the second on that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right. So Mr. Cannon,
Yes.
Mr. Henderson,
Yes.
Mr. Kirby,
Yes.
and Mr. Barkin.
Yes.
All right. So lot coverage was, the board has granted the lot coverage variance as well. So 5 of the 6 variances were granted by the board. But the building length variance was not. So this will be shared with the planning board. I know you're still going through site plan approval, but the project itself, well, the other variances would stand, the building length is not granted.
Okay. Yeah, actually, Greg, if Greg's got a question, I'll let Greg go first.
Go ahead, Jason. You can go first.
I just wanted to ask, I think at the last meeting, Victor had clarified that, if we had some variance approved, we could come back and work within that context. I just wanted to hear a little bit more like how that works. Like if we come back with 7 parking spaces in a new design, does that remain, the same if we don't exacerbate the extent of the variances?
Yeah, I think probably that's going to be easiest to work through with Megan. But yeah, you're certainly entitled to bring the project back, rely on the variances that you were granted, and then just, you know, tweak it to accommodate the one that was denied.
Right.
But it's not a, you know, kind of an outright denial of everything. You don't lose the ones that you were granted just because you weren't granted all of them, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I just had a quick procedural question. It's appeared that some of the motions are pre-written prior to the meeting. Are there motions in favor and against for each appeal, or how do those, like, how does that rationale get written prior to the meeting, and who does that? And then I have a second question.
So,
Yes.
oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead,
go
Megan.
ahead, Victor. I was just saying,
Yeah,
this was the board's comments from previous meetings that they used, is just typed up for them. I don't know.
It consists of positive and negative comments. You can kind of craft the motion either way.
Because this has extended across multiple meetings, Megan jotted down notes as they were speaking before and provided those to the board, but nothing that was contained in those notes is binding on the board in any way.
And then my second question, is it customary to stop a vote in the middle of a roll call? Or what's the procedural basis around that?
Can you
terms of
clarify?
clarifying the?
Yeah, I mean, I think you heard somebody cast a vote and then it was stopped and there was seeking clarity by the staff for what the vote being cast was.
Staff wasn't seeking clarity on what the vote being cast was. One of the members expressed concern that they misunderstood the motion and how they were supposed to vote. So we redid everything in its entirety. We based it with clarifying information.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, or shall we move on?
Thank you.
Sorry, Andre, you abstained. So if you have a question, you can, like, procedure, I'll be happy to talk about it with you later.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Do you say publicly the reason for the abstention?
I just joined the board. Oh, can I answer that question?
Yeah.
I just joined the board. You guys have had 5 meetings. You know, I've tried to go back and review all of the presentations to get answers to your previous questions and read your guys' full explanation. I haven't had a chance to do that. So that's why I abstained. I didn't feel like I could make a fully informed decision. You know, if it's here next month, I'll take the time, but not this time.
Okay. Thanks, Andre. I think we will keep moving on to our next matter.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good night.
Yep, thank you. And that brings us to administrative matters, which, let's see here. That's ask staff for an update on the May meeting, and then after that, Megan, we'll just get some early, or we'll get a sense for some upcoming projects.
So May meeting a little shorter distance because this one got pushed back a week. And I do thank everybody for being able to get together on a different from normally scheduled day. Right now we have 3 appeals scheduled for the May 3rd meeting. So I anticipate that it'll be the continuation of 228 Dryden Road that we heard tonight and 2 other new appeals. So, but I will confirm that, but tentatively that is the agenda. We also can't confirm, but we do anticipate that the board will be returning to in-person meetings for the May 3rd meeting. We cannot guarantee. We should know by Friday or Monday or sometime soon. But what that means is that the board members and staff will need to meet in common council chambers on May 3rd and future meetings. We plan, and by we, I mean the city as a whole, is planning to move forward to offer hybrid meetings for all quasi judicial boards and council meetings, that kind of thing. One, to there's been a lot of positive feedback that people feel that the remote meetings are more accessible, that they can participate remotely, and that they don't need to come down to City Hall and that kind of thing. It allows more opportunities. The other side of it too is COVID is still an active concern, and that it'll allow us to have options other than putting more people in council chambers. So there will be a hybrid option, and I'll probably have you all come a little bit early to the May 3rd meeting to introduce you to some of our new technology to help us and be able to do that. So in addition to that, so the board and staff will be there. We will be strongly encouraging both applicants and members of the public to continue to participate remotely, or in the case of public comments, by writing as well. That said, if there's a project team or a member of the public that wishes to come to an in-person meeting, they are welcome to do so, but we'll have the opportunity to participate remotely. It is also my understanding that the occupancy of common council chambers will be limited when we return to in-person meetings. So it's not going to go from us all being at home to, some of those council meetings we've seen where there's a couple hundred people in council chambers. So there will still be limits on that with some social distancing. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up on that. If you have concerns about participating in person, please reach out to me privately, and we can talk about what options might be available and how we could, if there's anything that can be done to make people more comfortable. And as soon as we know for sure, Victor and I continue to be surprised, and maybe we will again, but the guess right now is that we'll be in person on the 3rd. So although that was our guess for April too. And
I was convinced that we were going to go back to in person for this meeting, and then there was an 11th hour extension from the governor's office. So we'll see what happens on Friday.
Okay, so the other item I sent out, and I sent earlier to, and I know there's a lot of material, so you might not have had a chance to look too closely at it. There's a couple of we have several additional new construction projects that are going to be heading to the board soon. 2 of them that I sent out are both very close to each other in the Fall Creek area. One is called Ouden 2, and it is on Lake Street, and the other one kind of on the corner right below the current parking lot for the Ouden housing complex across the street, formerly Gun Hill Apartments. And then another proposal is for an apartment building just up the hill from that, called The Breeze. Both are going to be seeking multiple area variances each, some more substantial than others, just from a pure numbers point of view. So I think it might be helpful for the board to provide some initial feedback early in the process. We talked about ways to do this in our recent training that we had, to kind of clearly highlight particularly variances that are of notable concern to the board and you think could be kind of, showstoppers for their project, so to speak. So rather than do that late in the game, get that feedback to them early. Of course, staff always tries to relay, foresee where concerns might be and relay this, but in some cases, the applicants really need to hear the information from the board. So what I'd like to propose is both of what I sent were, for these 2 at least, were preliminary analyses. I'm still waiting on information. And I might suggest that once I get that information and can do a complete analysis of what those variance requests would be, having the teams come and do a preliminary presentation, similar to what we did, I guess, for Catherine Commons in College Town. Have that a presentation of the project, not a public hearing, but initial feedback from the board. Environmental review is not complete. The board cannot take action to approve anything, but it might be helpful for them to hear concerns, like I said. So are there any thoughts on that, or how you'd like to do it? Anything different you might have in mind? Okay.
I think this, whatever helps expedite staff and the planning board's ability to weigh in on those.
Okay. So I will check in with both project teams to see when they might want to come and present. There are still some decisions about environmental review and such being made for the projects at planning board. So I think after their meeting in a couple weeks too, there might be more information there as well. So, but yeah, so probably not for the May meeting, but possibly for the June, we could do one or both preliminary presentations. We'll see. So, okay. So that was I think my administrative matters, I should say. I guess.
I just had one question, Megan, and then we'll go to the next one. I guess, is there a way to get a presentation of sorts or a breakdown of some of the rationale behind certain areas and their parking requirements? Just because there's sort of this convergence of, personal opinion, urban planning, and staff, and then just the zoning that we're working with entirely. So I guess just sort of I think we will continue as a board to get lots of substantial parking variance asks. So what would be the best way for us to be updated along with that?
So this is an interesting question. So some of our parking requirements are newer than others. So for example, College Town parking requirements were pretty recently considered. Some of them downtown as well. We can give you kind of a broad overview on them, but I'll be the first to say that there's some areas that it might make sense at some point in the future to relook at those parking requirements. To a point that was brought up in relation to a couple of the appeals tonight, there's several ways that zoning tries to address density. One is lot coverage by buildings. In some of the districts, there's the maximum building lengths, but parking is often a way that in the past, whether right or wrong or current planning practice, has been used to limit density, so that if you can't provide the parking that you're required on your site, you don't have enough space for that building and all of those occupants. So I suppose we could do if it would be helpful, kind of a brief memo or something written about the different requirements. Again, some have had more recent scrutiny than others. So I think that's why we see some areas where they have big parking lots say they're not utilized, but then at the same time, there's projects that come forward and don't provide any parking, and that's kind of a reflection sometimes on the size of the building too. So
yeah, and just to add on, I will say that at the end of the day, the BZA is kind of legal mandated to consider those five factors that come with an area variance. So the background of the law can be helpful when you're considering something like, an undesirable change in the neighborhood, because it helps you understand what the neighborhood is and what it's designed to be. But kind of at the end of the day, it's not the board's function to rewrite council's parking laws. But I just want to throw that out there. But it certainly can help understand what they're supposed to be doing when you're considering those five factors.
Thank you. Andre?
Yeah, so is with parking, right? So gimme, we just reduced the parking by 3 parking spaces, right? If we did the same, that's basically, what was that, a 75% reduction, right? Can we think about substantial in terms of the percent change to that specific property? Or can we think about substantial in terms of, is it a substantial impact off the property, right? Because if we do a single family home and we say it no longer has to have any parking, but it only had 1 parking space, it's a substantial percentage change. I think everyone would agree, but it's only 1 space, which is less substantial than if we reduce 2 parking spaces on a 1,000 unit project, right? So can I think both ways, or what's the law say?
I think the easy answer is yes. with the condition that you treat similar properties similarly.
So in terms of like their classification, like I have to treat single family and multifamily the same, or do I have to make it somewhat proportional to the scale, right? Because it has the same unit impact, right, on the community.
Right. So, you know, kind of the ultimate, the overall kind of legal concern is that the board needs to treat similarly situated projects similarly, right? And there can be different considerations, maybe in a large multifamily unit than there would be in a single family house, right? So as long as the board is kind of consistent in its decisions over time, you can look at it either way. And that is ultimately up to you guys to determine, you know, the way that you're looking at substantialness. It's consistent application that matters, though.
It's consistent application for me, right? I have to be consistent, but other board members can have a differently consistent viewpoint.
For the board.
Board.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Board's current makeup or the board as a whole in the past? Like,
The board as a whole over time.
Okay.
Which is
yeah.
challenging, but
Which is challenging, and this is kind of I'm kind of going into law professor mode here, which I didn't mean to do. But this is one of the things about zoning is you have these you know, these what appear to be very clear rules that apply very differently because land is different, right? You know, one site is not necessarily like another site. So to the extent that you had two identical projects, you would have to treat them identically, but because the way that the real world works, everything's a little bit different.
I seem to just constantly get somewhat contradictory information on the extent to which this board is precedent based. So I think we can keep it at that for tonight.
yeah, and that's largely a function of the fact that land is different. No two parcels are identical, right? So there might be considerations that apply to one parcel that don't apply to another parcel, even though it's the same zoning law being applied to both.
Okay.
But the closer two properties are to each other, the more consistently the law should be applied, I guess, is a very overbroad rule of thumb.
Okay.
that helps me come to terms with, you know, I view the Gimme Coffee building as a much different product than what we just voted on, you know, so I think we'll just keep working through that. But yeah, any questions, we can always keep working.
Always ask us, we can help. That's what we're here for.
With that, I'd ask for a motion to enter into an executive session to discuss matters of pending litigation. Is there a second? Megan, you're about to raise your hand. Did I?
Oh, no, you're good. Sorry.
Okay.
You're fine.
Andre seconded that.
I second, yep.
1 minute to get things.
Who moved that? I'm sorry.
What, Anya?
I said who moved it? I was just noting it too. Who moved adjourning to executive session?
David.
Okay.
Yeah.
David moved, Andre seconded.
Okay, I will end the live stream